But at its heart, it has its technology backbone.
Spectrum powers scoreboards, ticketing, point of sales. They also provide a highly secure network that takes care of fan security, security of the Wi-Fi access, and any data that our fans are sharing while in the arena.
Our fans have an expectation that technology is part of their experience, and Spectrum helps us do that.
Jay says that this is Cole Allen in his hotel room in that building. I believe they said he was on the 10th floor. And apparently, before he ran through that magnetometer on the video that you saw, he took some selfies in the mirror of his hotel room, appearing to wear items including a shoulder holster, a sheathed knife, pliers, and wire cutters. Hours after the shooting, President Trump renewed his call for the construction of a secure White House ballroom.
This is why we have to have all of the attributes of what we're planning at the White House. It's actually a larger room, and it's a much more secure. It's drone-proof, it's bulletproof glass. We need the ballroom.
So the ballroom would cost an estimated $400 million. The White House says that it would be funded by private donations, some of those through different donors who would be contributing to this. Moments ago, Kentucky Senator Rand Paul introduced a bill that he says will keep the ballroom privately funded. He is chair of the Homeland Security Committee and member of the National Capital Planning Commission. Senator Paul, good to have you here, sir. Thank you very much for being here.
Yep. Thanks for having me.
You are obviously somebody who watches expenditures very closely. You're very critical of wasteful spending in the government. Why do you think that this is a good way to go about funding this ballroom?
Well, I do think there is a security risk. I mean, this is a third assassination attempt on the president, and I think that there is a need for an event space at the White House. As you said, I'm on the commission. We've already reviewed it. We've reviewed it for the last couple of months, and we voted 8-1 in favor of that. But as you mentioned, I am conservative, so this is my favorite kind of bill. It has no appropriations, no taxpayer expenditure. The president has said he can fund it privately. They've already started raising money for it. The other thing that's different about my bill is my bill doesn't say approve the Trump ballroom. My bill says that White House additions will be approved by the chairman of 2 committees, Oversight Committee, as well as the Planning Commission. So mine sets in place a process, but doesn't necessarily say, oh, we're only doing this for Donald Trump. And I actually don't do this. I do this to protect him, but I don't do this only for him. I do this for whoever the next president is and the next president.
So I want to play 2 different sound bites from 2 Democrats who have very different views on this. One is Senator Chuck Schumer, and then if we can play them back to back, you'll hear Senator Fetterman after that. Watch.
I think we've lost our audio.
Wages Donald Trump's reckless war as the Department of Homeland Security is still not funded. Does Donald Trump roll up his sleeves and say, let's solve these problems? No. He's focused on this ballroom. This gilded, gold-plated, taxpayer-funded ballroom. Trump's values are perverse.
Oh, nonsense.
The real reason why people are fighting to build a ballroom, it's the TDS. Our party, my party, as a Democrat, can't be defined by just being the exact opposite of whatever the president puts in front of us now. As elaborate as that facility would be, it's almost no way that could even be finished by the time his term is even done at this point.
All right. Unfortunately, as you may have heard Senator Paul say initially, it sounds like we've lost audio with him, and we're trying to reclaim our connection. Okay. Apparently, the senator is good. So sorry about that, Senator Paul. But basically, we just played Senator Schumer when you couldn't hear it. Saying that, this is a taxpayer-funded disaster and all Trump cares about is his gold-plated ballroom and he doesn't care about DHS funding. And then Senator Fetterman saying that, TDS is taking over his party and that he thinks that the safety security issue is instrumental, although he thinks it'll never be done in time. So what do you say to those across the aisle who are battling over this?
I don't think this should be partisan. I don't think it's about expense either, because there isn't going to be any expenditure if my bill were to pass. So I do think it's something that we can try to get beyond partisanship. And for goodness sakes, we ought to try to keep the president safe. It's almost an impossible job for the Secret Service, but I think this is something now about the safety, and we ought to try to take politics out of it.
Yeah. Well, when I was at the White House yesterday morning for the arrival ceremony, the cranes were moving and things appeared to be not even halted during that during the ceremony. I think President Trump said, "Just keep going, try to get it done as quickly as possible." So we'll see where it goes. Senator Paul, sorry about the audio issue, and thank you once again for joining us. We hope to see you soon.
Thank you.
So dramatic raids in Minneapolis as the feds attempt to root out extensive fraud in the state. Minnesota Senate candidate Michelle Tafoya says she would make this her top priority with zero tolerance for anyone who steals from the taxpayers of her state. We'll speak with her next. Minnesota Governor Tim Walz deflecting blame as the feds hunt for fraud in Minnesota, searching more than 20 locations on Tuesday. You remember all of this about these daycare centers and early education centers where there was nobody home, but the taxpayers were footing the bill. Prosecutors say that the staggering total of all this could top $9 billion taxpayer dollars that may have been stolen.
And shame on the governor from Minnesota and his crew there. Shame on them. Shame on him. And don't believe a word he has to say.
This is like the arsonist trying to claim credit for the work of the fire department, because Tim Walz let this fraud happen under his watch. Whether he was complicit in it directly himself or just turned a blind eye towards it, we really did not get much help at all from the governor's office.
I mean, certainly this falls under the governor's office to keep an eye on where this is all going. So in a moment, Minnesota Senate candidate Michelle Tafoya joins me, but first to correspondent Brooke Taylor in Dallas. Hi, Brooke.
Hi, Martha. The FBI carried out 22 search warrants all across Minneapolis on Tuesday, targeting these locations as part of the larger issue here of welfare fraud among the Somali community. So federal agents here, they were seen hitting up these daycares, targeting them, including the infamous Quality Learning Center. It went viral after a sign outside with learning misspelled. Federal prosecutors say the total amount of fraud in Minnesota could be $9 billion or more since 2018. Well, Governor Tim Walz, he's trying to take credit for these raids. He posted, quote, "Today's raids by state and federal law enforcement happened because our state agencies caught irregular behavior and reported it."
What a lie.
The FBI director
You're a liar,
firing
Walsh.
back, quote, "Come again." The FBI and DOJ drafted and executed every search warrant today, but go ahead and take credit for our work while we smoke out the
That's
fraud
right.
plaguing
The
Minnesota
Director
under your
Cash
governorship.
Patel
Meanwhile,
did
the
this.
Minnesota House Fraud Prevention Committee held a hearing, demanded accountability. A former DHS investigator and whistleblower had this to say.
More than once, I heard an owner or employee respond when we asked where they first learned about the daycare scam. They would say they had first heard about it while in the refugee camp in Kenya.
And he also said that there was a shift from leadership from investigating daycare fraud to then trying to stop those from investigating it. Martha.
Boy, they're just uncovering an incredible story here. Brooke, thank you for your reporting. With that, we bring Michelle Tafoya, candidate for U.S. Senate in Minnesota. She's trying to flip retiring Senate Democrat Tina Smith's seat. She's also the host of the Michelle Tafoya podcast and a legendary former NFL sideline reporter. Michelle, it's great to see you. Thank you for being here. You know, it's pretty extraordinary. Tim Walz is sort of, trying to recraft this as, boy, isn't it great that I cracked down on all of this. And I think it's good that the FBI directors pushed back on that. But this is the Minnesota State Rep Kristen Robbins explaining that he has had no part in their investigation. Watch this.
I'd like to note for the record that we invited Governor Walz to attend. We first issued an invitation to him on March 9th, and he got his pick of dates. And we never had any response. And then late last night, he declined our invitation.
And Michelle, I thought in Brooke's reporting, what they're learning in this investigation about these emails that were going back and forth, it seemed like a lot of people understood what was going on and were taking advantage of this money, buying real estate and all kinds of stuff. Tell us about that.
All kinds of stuff. And when I'm out there talking to voters, Martha, the first thing I bring up is fraud. And people get so angry because they feel like chumps. They feel like they work really hard, like we all do, and they pay their taxes like we're all supposed to. And where did that money go? And Tim Walz did play a role in this investigation. He resisted it. He interfered with it. These raids yesterday were the first sort of visual evidence that we have in Minnesota after a long time, after Nick Shirley really, that something is still happening. And I think it's heartened a lot of people. But Tim Walz's reaction and taking credit for helping out has enraged people. It's just, I think, everyone has said it. He's taking credit for putting out a fire that he started.
Right.
And it's just ridiculous. There is
Shame
so
on
much
him.
here. We saw
He ought to be in
22
jail.
warrants yesterday. I believe, Martha, more are coming. And I believe that this is encouraging to people. They want accountability here in Minnesota, but where they really want it is with Tim Walz and Keith Ellison, our AG, who they believe had oversaw it or turned the other way.
And let it happen.
Let it happen.
Well, that's the part that
On
this
purpose.
investigation would need to uncover.
Both of them.
That they had
Shameful.
some knowledge or that
Ellison
they were
and Walz.
negligent in their duties of leadership, overseeing these programs and either looking the other way intentionally or dropping the ball, which was their job to govern.
Tim Walz says it. The buck stops with me, he said. Well, he didn't do anything about it. And Keith Ellison, we've heard him on tape, thanks to the Center for the American Experiment, which is the think tank here, a very good one. They had this tape of Keith Ellison talking to some of these people who have since been arrested. By the way, we see the arrests of some of these fraudsters who have stolen from us. One of them got out of the country because they didn't remove the passport. They didn't take the passport. And this person who stole about $11 million fled the country. Now, if Tim Walz really wants to step up and share information before he leaves office, well, we'd like to see the SNAP enrollment numbers. We'd like to see the voter rolls. We'd like to see criminals who are here illegally be turned over to the feds. These are simple things, Tim, that you could probably help with as well.
Yeah, and if he wants to be a governor who is doing his job, he really needs to come forward and explain what the heck happened here. Michelle, thank you very much. Always good to see you, Michelle.
Thank you, young lady.
Joining us today, and that's the story on this Wednesday, April 29th. But as you know, the story continues to go on, and what a busy several days it has been. On a new episode of the Untold Story podcast, I sat down with Ambassador and Chief of Protocol Monica Crowley, who you see really at the front of every one of these international events. She is behind, planning these, making sure that the protocols are kept with all of these different, with all the different leaders. And here's what she had to say. Watch.
Going to China will be substantive. It will be focused on policy. President is scheduled to have several very intense conversations with President Xi Jinping. There are a lot of issues before the two of them. So it will be a working visit, even though the Chinese will provide all of the ceremonial aspects as well.
See what I mean? We had the UK trip underway, and she's thinking ahead to China, so download that and watch it. Will Kane starts right now as Vice President.
Live from Texas, this is the Will Kane Show. Today, a wide-ranging, exclusive, candid conversation with Vice President J.D. Vance. How he found his way back to faith through family, a journey he's recounting in a new book, plus his fraud crackdown in Minnesota and across the country, and what he makes of Governor Tim Walz trying to take a victory lap over yesterday's FBI raids at nearly 24 businesses. And this, in his first interview since the White House Correspondents Association dinner shooting, what he was thinking at this exact moment when Secret Service whisked him away and out of danger. That's where we begin. Here is the first part of my exclusive interview with Vice President J.D. Vance. Saturday night, Mr. Vice President, White House Correspondents' Dinner. In all transparency, you and I spoke shortly before this interview, and I did confirm with you that this was the first time something like this for you had ever been experienced, had to be rushed off of the dais there at the front of the stage. Tell me a little bit about Saturday night. What was your experience?
Yeah, I think, Will, honestly, it was tougher for my wife who was at home with the kids and started hearing things through, text messages and social media than it was for me. I really didn't know what was going on. Just to give you my perspective, I'm sitting up there on the dais with some journalists and obviously with the President of the United States a few seats to my right. And there's a lot of commotion. You kind of hear some loud noises. I had no idea what it was. And before I had any idea what was going on, I started seeing people sort of duck under their tables and respond to what was going on far in the back of the ballroom. And then an agent comes and whispers in my ear, basically says, "Sir, we have to leave." And you can you see the video, Will, where the agent sort of lifts me to my feet. And then I walk off stage and then go to my hold room and kind of wait and see what's going on. So, the first thing that happened that actually freaked me out a little bit, Will, is that we heard that an agent had been shot. And in the fog of war, I thought, oh my God, this guy's actually seriously injured or maybe worse. And then we found out later, of course, that he was uninjured or not seriously injured. So as you learn this information, the thing that I really gained an appreciation for, Will, is what an amazing job the agents of the Secret Service do. You saw they went right to me. They went right to the President of the United States. They put their lives in harm's way. And if I could just say, Will, I've had a Secret Service detail for all of 2 years. I wouldn't say that I'm used to it. And there's an interesting way where you just kind of get used to it, right? They're the people who drive you to the White House, or they're the people who hang out with your kids when your kids are running around outside. And they kind of fade into the background of your life a little bit. And it's easy to forget that the reason they're there is for nights like what happened Saturday night. So I just feel very grateful to them and very grateful for what they do, and frankly grateful to God that agent who was shot was not seriously hurt. It could have been a lot worse, but the law enforcement did a great job, Will, and we should all be grateful for that.
As are we. You mentioned to me that it was the first time you had to be rushed off stage. We're grateful that was a successful night in terms of the Secret Service and your protection, the president's protection, and we hope it's the last time that you ever have to be rushed off of a stage like that. Now, I just think it would take an incredible amount of self-imposed ignorance to not look around and see the way that our political environment is talking. And if I'll editorialize, it is largely coming, not exclusively, but largely coming from one direction. Certainly the bullets seem to be flying from one direction. You're now sort of in the direction of the fire. You're in the direction of the words and, unfortunately as well, the bullets. What would you say about everything, Mr. President, from comedians who seem to make some of this rhetoric mainstream to fringe elements now that have now gone mainstream within the left? What would you say about the way we're hearing rhetoric and conversation in politics?
Well, I think you said it well, Will. I can't improve upon it, which is that political violence right now is coming not exclusively, but largely from one side of the aisle. The president has now faced 3 serious attempts on his life in just the past year and a half. Of course, Butler, Pennsylvania. There was a situation at Mar-a-Lago that the media didn't really cover. And then, of course, there was the White House Correspondents Association dinner. So I think really it's incumbent upon everybody, but particularly those who are driving some of the narratives that Donald Trump, that Donald Trump has somehow invited this violence upon himself, that killing your political opponents is somehow justified. If you're engaged in that kind of rhetoric, you need to check yourself. You need to look yourself in the mirror and say that political disagreement is fine, but inviting violence upon your political opponents makes you part of the problem. Of course, our mutual friend, Charlie Kirk, was gunned down not even a year ago. And immediately after that happened, you saw some mainstream voices on the left pivot not to the fact that Charlie was a good husband and father, not to the fact that he was going and taking his message to campuses and talking to people, both those who agreed with him, but also those who disagreed with him. You saw people come out and say that somehow it was justified, or that somehow Charlie Kirk believed this bad thing that you're not supposed to believe, which is implicitly justifying the person who murdered him. Why can't we all just say, disagree aggressively? That's part of the beauty of the American system if you've got to, but we don't accept political violence in our system. And if you're part of the left wing in this country, you got to look yourself in the mirror and say, why is it that so many of the people who are firing guns at their political opponents agree with my perspective and listen to the same sources of information that I listen to? maybe that suggests the left has got to tone down the rhetoric a little bit. I certainly hope they do, because look, I love the president. Obviously, I love my family. We don't want this violence in our country. But the last thing I'll say, Will, is look, this is fundamentally, the president has such a good attitude about this, where he says the reason they come after him is because he's doing big things. And that's exactly right. They always go after, there's always some evil character who's going after people who are doing big things in our country. That doesn't mean you can't do big things. That just means you need courageous leaders at the top. And I know we've got a courageous leader in President Trump. It's amazing, but after all this, I've never seen the violence or the threat of violence even have a little bit of an effect on how he thinks about his job. It's the best thing maybe I could say about his character, which is saying quite a bit.
Mr. Vice President, there's a report out today, or it's from this week rather. It's in the Atlantic, and it says that sources inside your office are telling the Atlantic that you've been expressing some real concerns about missile depletion through the war with Iran. They read as follows. In closed-door meetings, J.D. Vance has repeatedly questioned the Defense Department's depiction of the war in Iran and whether the Pentagon has understated what appears to be the drastic depletion of U.S. missile stockpiles. Are you concerned on this front? Are you concerned about our missile stockpiles?
Well, let me say two things about that report, Will. So first of all, most of these reports I ignore. This one I actually read because it ascribed views to me and things that I had allegedly said that I am just 100% certain that I have never said. And in particular, there's a lot in that story, Will, and you know how this game works, that is attributed to people who describe themselves as Vance advisors. And a Vance advisor could be a staff member that I see every single day. It could also be a random person off the street that I've talked to once at the White House Correspondents Association dinner. What I feel confident about, Will, is that nobody who actually knows what I think, nobody who's close to me was speaking to that reporter, because if they did, then it would have been a totally different story. Now, to answer your question, Will, of course I'm concerned about our readiness, because that's my job to be concerned. But I think that Pete Hegseth, our Department of War Secretary, I think General Kane, our Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, they're doing an amazing job. But it's, of course, my job to ask these questions. It's, of course, my job to make sure that we're on top of every issue. And, of course, it's the president's job, too. And I think that both of us are very focused on that. But we've got a great military, a military that can do a lot, Will. So don't believe everything you read, especially in papers like The Atlantic.
Our conversation, of course, did not stop there. While the federal government cracks down on fraud, Governor Tim Walz of Minnesota is trying to take credit. And the vice president isn't having it.
Well, this is like the arsonist trying to claim credit for the work of the fire department, because Tim Walz let this fraud happen under his watch.
Part 2 of my exclusive interview is next. But before we go, the Federal Reserve issuing its latest interest rate decision, leaving rates unchanged as expected. So let's see how the markets are reacting. The Dow and S&P 500 closing in the red, the NASDAQ today in the green.
It looks like an ordinary staircase, but as you age with occasional nerve discomfort that can feel like...
With a new report identifying $186 billion of improper payments across 64 programs in fiscal year 2025 alone. It's one reason why the federal government is ramping up its fraud crackdown. Yesterday, authorities raided more than 20 locations in Minnesota, including multiple child care centers, and now, as well, the infamous Quality Leering Center. Investigators say some state licensed daycares may have been billing for services that were never provided, and the raids are part of the broader fraud probe involving largely Somali-owned businesses. In other words, a federal operation, something Governor Tim Walz doesn't seem to realize.
We've created additional checks and balances. We brought on more investigators, more auditors, more law enforcement agencies,
BS.
as well as an
Shame
outside
on
firm
you.
to take a look at high-risk programs. People who have ripped us
It's
off
people like
are getting
this
caught, and
that
they are going
lie.
to jail, just like today.
And
I've
it's
said the
a
buck
tragedy.
stops with me. And as I know some of you will take that as an open invitation to play politics with every incident of fraud that takes place here in Minnesota, even though I have to tell you, statistics show it's happening in red states more than here, but so be it.
Should someone tell him? Well, I can leave that to the vice president. Vice President J.D. Vance, who's heading up the crackdown, and here's more of my exclusive interview with the vice president. As you know, Governor Tim Walz of Minnesota has claimed some credit for the fraud crackdown in Minnesota. Is there credit to be deserved for the governor?
No, not at all, Will. This is like the arsonist trying to claim credit for the work of the fire department, because Tim Walz let this fraud happen under his watch. Whether he was complicit in it directly himself or just turned a blind eye towards it, we really did not get much help at all from the governor's office. Where we did actually get some help was from some state, local law enforcement officers who we assigned to the federal task force because the state government wasn't doing anything. So all credit goes to people on the ground, the federal officers, the state officers who are working to uncover this fraud. The best part about this for me, Will, is you have, when the president empowered his entire government to go after this fraud issue, I had this question to the Department of Justice. These investigations take a long time. So I was asking myself, how quickly can we start getting into some real investigatory work, court-issued warrants, actually going door to door and finding out what's going on? People told me it would take at least 6 months. We've gone from Nick Shirley's video about the Minneapolis fraud schemes to active, judges issuing warrants for this investigation in a matter of 3 months. We've got 280 law enforcement officers working on this problem. We really have the most accelerated, aggressive anti-fraud operation that we've ever seen from the federal government. And again, it's because the President of the United States empowered his team to go after this. That's what we're doing, and this is just a very, very good next step. This is far from done, Will, but we're doing a lot of good work and we're making a lot of progress.
Far from done. You mentioned complicity, and you analogized the governor to an arsonist. Do you expect some type of accountability, beyond political, some type of accountability for Attorney General Ellison or Governor Walz?
Well, we have to follow the law where it leads. And what we know is that there were multiple Minnesota authorities who were turning a blind eye to this fraud. What we don't yet know is whether they knew it was going on as it was going on, but that's one of the things that we're looking at with these investigations. We're not gonna, we're not gonna let anybody who committed a crime off the hook. And in fact, if you're a senior officer, if you're the attorney general or the governor or any other elected official, we're gonna look extra hard at what you knew and when you knew it and how connected your actions were to this fraud scheme. But that's part of the reason why we're serving these warrants, Will, is because of course people don't come out and tell you, oh yeah, I knew that the Quality Learning Center was committing fraud and people were getting rich off of it and I did nothing. People don't say that. So we've got to do the investigatory work to understand what was known, when it was known, and by whom. That's a big part of the reason why the fraud investigation, these warrants that we saw being served all across the city of Minneapolis, why that's such a big deal is because we're finally starting to really get into the nitty-gritty of what we knew, of what people were involved in this fraud scheme. But regardless of whether there was criminal wrongdoing on behalf of the governor, of course, like I said, well, we're going to let the law make those determinations. We know that he turned a blind eye towards this. I mean, you have people, Will, who came into this country, many of them illegally, and 6 months later they're driving Mercedes despite the fact that they don't have a job. That doesn't happen without some defrauding of the American taxpayer. The fact that they turned a blind eye towards it for so long is a scandal. We're also going to find out whether it was criminal.
Amen.
Shame on Walz. For one more second. You mentioned the people that come into this country,
and
sometimes illegally, sometimes legally, and then take advantage of our system here in the United States. We know, for example, as you mentioned with the Quality Learning Center, that much of this was located within the Somali community in Minneapolis. Could the law lead you to a place where we'd see accountability in the form of denaturalization or deportation from people that come to this country, legally or illegally, and take advantage of America?
Yeah, well, absolutely. And that's one of the angles that we're looking at is the people who committed immigration fraud against our system and how do we denaturalize those people and send them back to where they came from. There's also, as you know, Will, under the Biden administration, there was a big blurring of the lines between illegal and legal immigration. The Biden administration would often take people who were coming in on fraudulent asylum claims, fraudulent refugee claims, and basically wave the magic wand of amnesty and say, we're not going to enforce the immigration laws against those people. The first thing, and maybe the most important thing that we did in the Trump administration is that we stopped that from happening, but then you still have a lot of people who benefited from that Biden administration amnesty program. We're trying to unwind as much of that as possible. We've already had some success, by the way, Will, despite the fact that left-wing radicals in the justice system, the court system, have tried to stop us. we have been able to denaturalize and actually unwind that temporary protected status, a lot of those fraudulent asylum claims. So that work has been happening, but it's going to keep on happening so long as Donald Trump is president. I think Minneapolis is the tip of the iceberg. I think there's sort of a good news, bad news situation in that, Will, which, you know, the good news is that we're stopping the fraud that's happening against the American taxpayer. The bad news is that my own children will never be able to attend school at the Quality Learning Center. So, you know, you got to take the balance, the good with the bad. But fundamentally, what we're able to do is make sure that this fraud is stopping, that the American taxpayer is not being stolen from anymore. And one final point on this, Will, is we have to understand this as really a two-way fraud system. On the one hand, you've got American taxpayers who are generous, who love to take care of their country, who are paying their taxes, and they expect it to go to the services that people are actually legally entitled to. They don't expect it to go to fraud. Those people, millions and millions of Americans, are being taken advantage of by this fraud. You also have people who are supposed to benefit from certain services. Let's say you take, for example, a food stamp recipient, a low-income American who's down on their luck, who needs a little help to ensure they put food on the table for their kids. When you have Somali fraudsters take away from that program, that means those resources aren't there for kids who actually need it, American citizens who actually need that. So this fraud ring that we've allowed to fester in this country, it defrauds the taxpayers. It also literally takes resources from the mouths of poor children. We have to go at it for both reasons, and we are.
You know, Mr. Vice President, you and I share something in common, and I learned this when I was researching your brand new book, which is coming out June 16th. The book is entitled Communion, Finding My Way. And what we have in common is you talk about in this book sort of your drift away from the church and the faith that you grew up with when you were young, and then you found your way back later, in your case, in your conversion to Catholicism. And I'm curious, what, as you described it, didn't take root from the sort of religion you were handed as a kid, that you were raised in, and then ultimately how you found your way back?
Yeah, well, it's an interesting question. It's something I talk about in some detail in the book. But I think one of the things that happened for me is that while my mamaw, the woman who raised me, my grandmother, she was a person of very deep faith, we didn't have a very consistent practice of the faith. We didn't go to church regularly. We didn't have a faith community that sustained us. And so, you know, as I went from high school to the Marine Corps and then to college, you know, I just didn't have a firm enough root when all these forces from the outside encouraged me to discard my faith, encouraged me to think of people who did have faith as wrong-headed or simple in some way. And so that faith just kind of shriveled up and died a little bit. But, you know, some of those seeds that were planted, I think, by my grandfather, by my dad, they did eventually take root. And fundamentally, Will, I think that the way to summarize my own journey is that as I became a husband and father, I began to think about the deep questions. You know, not what kind of credentials you have or what kind of job you have or how much money you make. I started to think to myself, how do I raise, you know, a happy family? How do I be a good husband to this woman that I've fallen in love with? How do I be a good father to these children that we plan to have? And the more that I thought about those deeper questions, the more that I thought the best answers were in that Christian faith that I had discarded. And that's what ultimately led me back on the pathway to faith. I think all of us have our own journey, but that's a good way to summarize mine. And if you want to read the longer version, of course, you can check out the book,
which will be out this coming June. We want to thank the Vice President for his time in this interview. Now to this. From the far side of the moon to side by side with the President. President Trump hosting the Artemis II crew in the Oval Office and joking that next time he might want to join them.
Is a president allowed to go up in one of these missions?
We can get working on that, Mr.
We have no problem, right?
We'll launch more rockets. The opportunity.
We'll have to try it. Congratulations very much.
Still ahead, the King and Queen take New York City. It's day 3 of their historic state visit. And I will speak with Brit and Grammy Award-winning rock star Winston Marshall next. Responders and victims' families and were escorted by former Mayor Mike Bloomberg. The two then split up. The King went uptown to Harlem for a community event on urban farming and nutrition, and the Queen visited the New York Public Library, delivering a new addition to the world-famous collection of Winnie the Pooh characters. this hour, King Charles participating in a US-UK trade event, meeting with top business leaders. So joining me now, Grammy Award-winning British rock star and former banjoist with Mumford & Sons, Winston Marshall. Winston, it's really good to see you on the program. Over the past couple of days, since I've had various commentators on, all with fancy accents, they have told me that Keir Starmer isn't that popular back home. But the question is how popular King Charles remains and what kind of healing he can do here in America with President Trump.
Good point. Starmer is not popular at home. He was elected on only 20% of the electorate, 35% of all those who voted, but if you include those who didn't vote, who could have, it's down to 20%. That was how he started, and he's only gone downhill since then. But importantly, and relevant to this week, is the amount of damage that's been done to that special relationship between your country and mine, this very ancient relationship between one people, I think. We're cousins, but we have one heritage. And the damage done, it started, you remember Greenland, for example, when Starmer sent a single officer there, as if it was totally virtue signaling, but as if that might actually do something to stop whatever Trump was hoping for there. And again, we saw the damage done with the Iran conflict, Starmer not allowing the Americans to use the base at Diego Garcia in the Chagos Islands, nor to use RAF Fairford in Britain. This has done considerable damage. And what we've seen here, and it's not just King Charles, but also President Trump, is a wonderful outpouring of admiration, two-way admiration. Charles has really affirmed this ancient relationship that we have. But as I can say as a Brit, I'd like to point out how grateful and flattered I feel that Trump has put on this great show, that you Americans have put on this great show for us, and despite the behavior of our current administration, our current Prime Minister, that you are putting out the pomp and circumstance, the pomp and pageantry that we're quite, keen to show when, in Britain for these sort of occasions. To see you guys do it, it's been really, really sweet and wonderful, and I feel full of love, if I'm allowed to get emotional.
I don't know what to say on behalf of all Americans. You're welcome. I think I do know what to say, actually, Winston. It's that we should remain dedicated as cousins, as you mentioned, to defending. Our very existence rests upon the idea of defending Western civilization, and far too societies cannot marshal ourselves to defending Western civilization. There is no hope for the future of Western civilization. And might I offer this sad example from your home country? There was two Jewish men stabbed in North London. Now, on the bright side, by the way, that your country seems to be willing to call it what it is, and that is an act of terrorism. That, according to, I believe it's the London police, is clear. It's an act of terrorism. And there are a rising number of acts of terrorism, at the very least anti-Semitic incidences in the UK. You've risen over the last 3 years almost threefold, Winston.
Well, Will, if I can correct you, actually, our Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, is not prepared to call it what it is. This is not the first major anti-Semitic attack. It's an anti-Semitic attack. Yes, they're calling it a terror attack, but we have had a whole series of these this month alone, and I have to just, they happen so regularly now I couldn't possibly remember them, but in the last month, on the 23rd of March, 4 Jewish ambulances were destroyed. On the 15th of April, there was an attempted arson attack at Finchley Reform Synagogue. On the 17th of April, a suspected arson attack at a Jewish charity premise in Hendon. 18th of April, a suspected arson attack at Kenton United Synagogue in Harrow. And then we have these two attacked here. We have imported our anti-Semitism. This was not a problem that we had. In the 350 years since Oliver Cromwell allowed the Jews back into Britain, we've only had once a Jewish person killed for being a Jew. That was back in the 60s. In October last year, Jews were killed in Manchester by a Syrian-born man called Jihad al-Shami. We have imported our anti-Semitism, and it's coming from a very specific community and from a very specific ideology. That is Islam. It is very clear throughout the Quran, throughout the Hadith, that that is where the problem is, and our progressive leadership will not call that out.
Will not defend Western civilization. Here's to hopefully a brighter future, Winston, in preserving our past. Winston Marshall, we always love having you on the program. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Will.
All right. Today, by the way, the Supreme Court striking down a Louisiana district map limiting a key provision of the Voting Rights Act. In the process, the High Court decided that lawmakers illegally used race when drawing up a new majority black district. The 6-3 ruling could reshape voting all across the South, and as a result of ending racial gerrymandering, boosting the odds that Republicans keep control of the House. And that's something that we will be watching. Coming up, teachers in your children's school cheering on the attempted assassination of a sitting president. And now they are facing, at least in some cases, consequences. Fox and Friends co-host Lawrence Jones joins me on the Will Cain investigation next. Welcome back. A disturbing, but at this point, all too unsurprising trend. People going online not to condemn violence from Saturday night's White House Correspondents' Dinner, but to complain that the attempted assassination failed. A United Healthcare employee, remember now, the company whose CEO was assassinated, had in their video reacting to the attempt on President Trump's life.
We're cooked as a country when my first reaction to hearing the news about Trump's attempt was, it was probably fake. Like immediately I was like, oh, that wasn't real. Probably fake. And the second was, aw, they missed? So happy they missed. Oh. Yeah, that's sad.
United Healthcare saying violence is never acceptable in any context that suggests otherwise are in no way consistent with our mission and values. The person who made those comments online about Saturday's incident at the Washington event where President Trump and many other leaders were gathered is no longer employed by the company. But see, it doesn't stop there. We are seeing this type of thing across industry, across America, but there has been at least some disciplinary action. Follow me over to the wall.
And as former superintendent of education for the Commonwealth of Kentucky,
who's been placed on leave. Why?
Because this
man posted the following. I'm not impressed with recent presidential assassins. It's embarrassing. Booth, Guiteau, Schlagosh, Oswald must all be spinning in their graves. MAGA with 2 A's, which he says means make Americans great assassins again, for what it's worth. Of course, Booth, Abraham Lincoln, Guiteau, the assassin of President James Garfield, Schlagosh, the assassin of President McKinley, and everyone understands Oswald. The school district responded. They wrote, the Kalkana Area School District has been made aware of a situation involving an employee. In their social media post, the district has placed the employee on administrative leave and will take additional action after we review the matter. The district unequivocally rejects any conduct, expression, or behavior that may encourage, condone, or promote violence in any form, and it is committed to maintaining a safe and supportive learning environment for all students, families, and staff. But that's not the only example, because in Ohio, a preschool teacher went viral for posting a video appearing upset that President Trump wasn't killed.
There's been a few creators on here saying that like Friday or yesterday could have been the day. And then I wake up to that news, but not that news. We're gonna have to pay really close attention to what they're trying to actually distract us from.
Kareem Baum. She did not answer our request for comment. But the daycare told Fox, our organization does not tolerate and explicitly condemns any calls for violence. The comments made online by this individual, it's deeply inconsistent with our values. And the individual in question has been terminated. All right, so we have administrative leave, we have termination, but we've also seen all of this before. It's a pattern. After the assassination of Charlie Kirk, one teacher in Chicago went viral for allegedly mocking his death. And then there was South Carolina. Another teacher posted thoughts and prayers. But America became better today. There, I said it. The school district confirming to us, by the way, that that teacher has not been employed there since September 11th, 2025. So here's the question. This is clearly the new normal. When did it happen, and what does it mean about the future of America? Joining me is Fox and Friends co-host Lawrence Jones. Hey, Lawrence, let's do this real quick. When do you think this happened? Like, did this happen gradually, or was this acute? Like, when did this become normal?
I would say, Will, it's been normal for a while now. Of course, you know, it's escalated in the modern era because it's Donald Trump, but the hatred toward Republicans, conservatives, and academia, I mean, The assassin, would-be assassin here in this case, was teacher of the month. You know, he was a tutor. He was a part of academia. And they don't feel much shame. We got to remember, these aren't like private recordings or someone that was at a dinner or something that said these comments. These are all public remarks. These are at protests. These are on social media. And so we have to ask ourselves, is the environment already there where these people feel like it was okay to say?
You know, it makes you wonder, the second part of my question, Lawrence, is where we go from here. Like, I can almost hear the water circling the drain. If this is the way that we are now, we're openly inviting and celebrating assassination. And I think I want to ask you a question, Lawrence, that I've been asking everybody lately on Will Kane Country, my digital and podcast. And that is, do you think after President Trump is done holding public office that we go back to normal? Or is this insanity that we're seeing here, is it just transported over to J.D. Vance or Marco Rubio or whoever it may be that is a Republican?
Well, to be fair, it didn't start with Donald Trump. I mean, Mitt Romney went through the same thing. John McCain went through the same thing. It is racist. It is bigots. It is everything. Donald Trump has just been the first politician within the movement that just doesn't care. And he was able to usurp the typical, media establishment, and he developed a connection with American people. So no, Will, when he leaves the stage, it's still going to exist. You know, one of the things that has troubled me about this entire event, even when you look at the media, and many of us were there when this assassination attempt, but when I've watched the coverage, many people in the media have made it about themselves when they were clearly not the target. There were a group of people that they were a target. It's in the manifesto. It was Donald Trump and his cabinet. Sure, I'm not saying that as human beings we cannot be traumatized by the event, but let's be clear here. You weren't the target, and Monday morning they went to the same rhetoric that they were spewing the night before the assassination attempt, Will.
Well, if you want the perfect illustration of how they made it about themselves, Lawrence, is the videos from that night, holding up their phones, take the videos. But instead of the phone shooting out at the events happening, it was shooting back at their face, watching the events happening. Always the star. The show just goes on around you. Thank you, Lawrence.
Spot on, brother. Spot on.
Thank you, buddy. All right, coming up, the irony. Democrats give a standing ovation to an actual king. A reality check with Kennedy next.
This time about a picture of seashells on a North Carolina beach a year ago. And this won't be the end of it. But nothing has
You
changed
should
with
be in
me.
jail
I'm
is where you
still
should be, and
innocent.
shameful.
I'm still not afraid, and I still believe in the independent federal judiciary, so let's go.
And of course, Jimmy Kimmel couldn't sit this one out.
And he ought to be ashamed.
Trump's pets in the DOJ are claiming this is some kind of threat or call to violence. Which,
Well, it is.
Even he should be embarrassed by this. Put
An
that back
ignorant
up. That
person.
is not a threat. That is a piece of art your aunt with a beach house would buy on Etsy.
What's with that willful ignorance? President Trump says it's not a laughing matter.
The mob uses that term to say when they want to kill somebody, they say 86, the son of a gun. I'm trying to keep the language nice and clear. They don't use that term, son of a gun.
He's
They use
exactly
it
right.
But
They ought to
it's a
be
mob
ashamed
term
of
for
themselves. And anybody that does that sort of thing ought to be sitting in a jail cell.
Host of that podcast, Kennedy. It's just seashells, Kennedy?
Yeah,
It's
just seashells,
artwork?
that's all. Yeah. It's just a little macrame, just something with a hot glue gun that you would throw together with some things you find on a little beach walk, that's all. Come on, Will. We all know what it is. We know that Comey is telegraphing get rid of Donald Trump. And the gray areas, does he mean get rid of him, meaning impeach him, meaning don't let him run for a third term? Or, hopefully, is he saying, hopefully the assassin will have better luck next time? And, that's the fear of people who certainly were in the room on Saturday night at the Correspondents' Dinner, is these threats are very real and they're not a joke, and you can't pretend to not know what they're talking about.
I think you nailed it. There's no way that's a random arrangement of shales on the beach or that grandma did it with a hot glue gun. It has a message. The question is, and it will be a question of fact for a jury, is it a threat to his life or is it something suggesting just get rid of him? It does, I'm afraid, make him a bit of a martyr in the meantime, a la Don Lemon. But let's move to this. Kennedy, Mamdani, New York City mayor. He's already begging for a bailout. He announces that New York City is in a budget crisis after spending the entire campaign promising free stuff. Watch.
New York City faces a budget crisis of a historic magnitude.
You're a phony person. Shameful.
Since the Great Recession. We cannot close this deficit with savings alone. We need new revenue. And we need a structural reset in our relationship with the state. That is the only way to meet our legal obligation to pass a balanced budget, and to do so without imposing a financial burden onto the backs of working people.
Oh, so pony up, Poughkeepsie. We need your money in New York City.
Yeah, exactly. The rest of the state is going to have to pay for his bad socialist math. And, you know, he hasn't even gotten to the free universal child care.
Nothing
and free
but a
buses,
communist.
Which will never come to fruition
Shameful.
because it was already too expensive to begin with. And that's the ironic thing. Things are very, very expensive once you make them free.
Yeah, it's like out of a high school, student body election, student council election. The guy who promised the free Coke machine in the Commons now can't afford it. Good job, New York. You basically just replicated, election starring Reese Witherspoon. Really quickly, I found this fascinating, Kennedy. Democrats have been worried for some time about a king, no kings, and yet here they were yesterday celebrating the king.
I want to congratulate Charles on having made a fantastic speech today at Congress. He got the Democrats to stand. I've never been able to do that. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it. They liked him more than they've ever liked any Republican or Democrat, actually. So I just want to thank you and congratulations. It's not an easy thing to do. That's a tough place.
Kennedy.
Nancy Pelosi was like, I remember when the other King George, he wanted to take all the colonies. I was there for it, yes.
I think she was there for it. She was there for it. Betting on the Dutch East India's Company stock at that time, I'm sure, as well. Very successful for Nancy Pelosi. Great to see you, Kennedy. Thank you. All right. Make sure you set your DVRs and never miss an episode of The Will Cain Show where we get to the heart of the matter. From the heart of America, it is now time for the 5.
He attacked the White House Correspondents' Dinner. The shooting marked the 3rd attempted assassination plot targeting President Trump in just 2 years. And despite fresh calls to cool the rhetoric that puts a target on Trump's back, some on the left are digging in. Governor J.B. Pritzker, when reacting to the DOJ indicting Comey, somehow finding a way to accuse Trump of inciting violence.
No.
This president
Shame
is
on
guilty
you.
of inciting violence, and now he's using the First Amendment. He's going after people for exercising their First Amendment rights and claiming that they're the ones who are attacking
Shame
people.
on
this
you.
whole administration seems full of people who are just following
You ought to be in jail.
whatever this demented
Pritzker.
president tells them to do.
Others on the left are deflecting, insisting that political violence is not a Democrat problem, even though Republicans have been the target of numerous attacks. Watch.
No one's legitimizing violence in any way. I have very little patience for this. Has the president faced 3 threats in the last couple of years? Absolutely. Is that abominable? Absolutely. The problem with political violence and extremism is evident on both sides.
The Democrats are blamed all for their rhetoric. When what I hear over and over again is Democrats saying, please tone it down, please tone down the rhetoric. That's not what we stand for. And we have seen, frankly, from the other side, from Trump and others, elevated rhetoric. Now, you don't want to get a he said, she said place, but it's really infuriating.
But Vice President J.D. Vance is pushing back, telling Will Cain that rage-fueled Democrats need to take a long look in the mirror.
If you're engaged in that kind of rhetoric, you need to check yourself. If you're part of the left wing in this country, you got to look yourself in the mirror and say, why is it that so many of the people who are firing guns at their political opponents agree with my perspective and listen to the same sources of information that I listen to? Maybe that suggests the left has got to tone down the rhetoric a little bit.
Yeah, Jesse, it's incredible how lopsided it is. I don't know the rose-colored glasses that they're using.
Well, the glasses are worn by two Democrat press flacks for Democrat presidents. Where would they get this idea, Emily, that Trump is such a threat, that he needs to be taken out? Where would they get the idea that he's such a unique danger, a genocidal dictator like Hitler, who at any day could just kill everybody in sight? Where would they get the idea that he's mentally deranged and that the cabinet and perhaps the military might have to do something about that? That he's already putting immigrants, innocent ones, in concentration camps and killing innocent fishermen? Where would they get the idea that he was a Russian traitor, a sexist, white supremacist who his slogan means really go back to when women and blacks couldn't vote? This isn't coming from the dark underbelly of the internet. This is coming from the mainstream media, in the New York Times, on network TV, on network late night television. You go online and this is what they say. And they can't stop saying it because they can't dial it back. It's who they are. Everything they're saying defines everything about them. If you strip out the hate, they have nothing. There's no policy, there's no agenda. They can't have an executive say, hey, guys, maybe don't book the guy that calls Trump Hitler. Maybe don't have him on again. The rundown where you're calling him a genocidal maniac, conducting illegal wars and raping and pillaging people. Maybe you don't use that tonight. No one's telling them that because hate is profitable. And until you break the business model, you're never going to be able to tear this system apart. And that's what it is. It's about money. And that's why it's being driven so strongly, because the ratings are going down. And you can see as the ratings go down, the hatred and the insanity goes up, and it's going to reach a breaking point pretty soon.
Well, some argue, Dana, the breaking point is 3 assassination attempts on the president, that by the grace of God, he survived them. But I mean, what the future, it seems really terrifying. And to your point, I was under the table with a lot of journalists that use words like crystal knocked and likened his campaign rally here at MSG to Nazi Germany and Hitler-esque. I mean, these are words that are in headlines in these mainstream media journalists.
Well, unity was over by the time President Trump finished the press conference on Saturday night. But I really think, in some ways, obviously there are people on cable news hits, but I was mentioning yesterday, but since this is a new group, I will say it again, because I keep thinking about where everybody is in the muck and in the soup, and there's the cable news, yes, okay, and the media, yes, okay, but where people are mostly getting information is online, and that is where it is really just disgusting, filled with conspiracy theories. We're going to probably talk about that in a little bit as well, as we did yesterday, as we should. The one thing I wonder about the Democrats is there's a lot of them who want to be president and they want to run in 2028. So they keep doing the same thing over and over again. There's been 3 assassination attempts. We have the same thing happen each time. There's a call for unity or a call for calming down the rhetoric. And then they'll say, okay, yeah, we should do that, but he should do that. And then within 30 minutes, it's over and everybody's going back. And I just wonder, is there a Democrat out there who is smart enough to say, I'll do something different. Mr. President, could we meet? Could we come in? There's 3 things we want to work on. 1, 2, 3. And maybe we could figure out something to do. Like, I'm willing to meet you halfway. Could you meet me halfway? Could we come see you? Of course the president's going to say yes, so meet with anybody that's willing to have a good faith conversation. And so is there a Democrat who has the courage to think about not just catering to the far left-wing base of the party, but to actually lead more in a way that says, I'm willing to do something different and to try to change the trajectory of these things that would maybe change the conversation, maybe get a few things done. Like, there are some big problems that the country is facing that we could all maybe use some unity on, and at least going forward, and have somebody moderate the conversation. Maybe it's Harold. Maybe Harold and I go together and we moderate this conversation. I mean, there seems to me there's a room for something new and different if somebody's willing to pivot.
I love that suggestion, Harold, and especially because it benefits the American people whom the Democrats serve, as do Republicans. But I note that it seems to me that any Democrat that tries to do that in any primaries or by their colleagues, they are slandered and slammed as allying with Donald Trump, that being bipartisan is actually a negative against their history, that somehow being defiant and engaging in this violent rhetoric is the only way for their stock to remain approved on the Democrat side.
I don't know about that. I think it probably goes both ways. It may, you see Tom Massey and others who differ with the president. They face some primary challenges. But it's good to be with everybody. I hope you guys had a great time at the dinner celebrating our country and the 250 years. I'm reminded of King Charles as we talk about this because I thought his speech yesterday was outstanding. I wasn't on the show yesterday, so I didn't get a chance to comment. The seriousness of the speech, the way he appealed to the best of us, and even when he talked about his differences and our country's differences, he talked about it, whether it be NATO or other things. He talked about it with such calm dignity, and a sense that and a belief in sharing with the American people, those who follow these things closely or those who don't. I think sometimes we're so invested in some of these conversations and some of these narratives and arguments that we can forget that a lot of Americans, if not the overwhelming majority of our audience, are working their tails off and watch us for a little news or for a little entertainment or for both. And yesterday, a lot of people were being introduced to him, and I thought the way he talked about our differences, the U.S. and UK on NATO and other things, was so great. Now, I've set my piece on this issue, and I think that, and I'll just repeat the highlights of it. I think that if we don't accept the fact that we're all drowning in all of this rhetoric, the negative rhetoric, I don't doubt, nor do I dispute that Democrats are probably the biggest generators of it now, the negative things, the awful things. But Emily and everyone around the table, I'll remind us, we are steeped, unfortunately, in a tradition of violence in our country, and even political violence at times. The data shows the last 10 years, maybe right-wing groups were more responsible for some of it. In the last year and a half, this is just the data, the last year and a half, Democrats or the left-wing leaning groups have certainly been the biggest agitators, and according to the data, more of it is coming from left-wing or Democrats and others. Now, I take no solace over the last 10 years or contentment or inspiration because the violence may have been coming from right-leaning groups, nor should anyone take any solace because it may be coming from left-leaning groups. We're all going to be devoured by this rhetoric if our political body and political system is unable to function because as I said the other day, there's a rot in our country. But I want to be clear. I'd go with Dana anywhere. Dana asked me to go to talk about politics and to talk about trying to solve things because I think at the end of the day, if all we do, and I tried to say it yesterday or 2 days ago, all we do is retreat to a crowd saying it's them, they're the problem, then we're not going to solve the problem. There's nothing wrong with saying it's them to try to let everybody know that they made a mistake. But if it's them because we're getting some contentment or satisfaction that it's not us, I think that's a dangerous thing. So Dana, I'm signed up with you. If they let us in at the White House, I'm with you.
Where are we going? And Greg, we're learning that the right-wing extremist violence was actually funded by the left-wing extremists. So that it seems to be that per your point, recently it is coming all from one source, and it would be nice if the leadership had any attempt at quelling it.
Yeah, and also the research that the media uses to kind of equate both sides is incredibly flawed. A joke even. I mean, I could just list the types of crimes, whether it is ambushes. We remember the ambushes. We remember the sustained rioting, the sustained looting, the attacks on government facilities, the attacks on law enforcement, businesses, individuals, religious institutions. It's like something on nearly 500 in the past, 7 years that could be linked to the left, one to the right. January 6th, and that has been exploited. We know that.
How's it going,
I am going to say,
pretty good.
let's just ignore the rhetoric.
Hang on just a second, I'll shut this off.
The rhetoric thing is done. It's a tradition in America to say bad things about people. So why don't we just ask who's guilty of the violence? That's the avoidance.
Going to take a little break now,
What they're trying to do is they're trying to
got
get
some work
us
to
into
do
the
here.
battle over
It's a
rhetoric.
business to take care of,
I do it too. Okay, then
but
let's
enjoyed
just find
bringing
out
you the program
what
today.
side's
We'll try to pick it up a little later.
lead to
God bless
violence.
you, and
Because
take
I
care and
agree
have a
with
great
you, Trump
day.
says some really
Travels
big
with
things,
Dr.
but
John
we don't kill
Stephenson
the
on
Democrats
YouTube and
afterwards.
Facebook. God bless you
Liberals
all.
won't advance to that next.
Mexico came, Canada came, Japan and Germany, but they're all coming back now. We're having some fake inflation because of the fuel, the energy prices.
If you need more time, Does that mean Americans should anticipate spending more on gasoline for the foreseeable future?
Well,
You know what they get for that?
I got one of those.
Iran without a nuclear weapon.
Tonight we look at the effects of the Iran conflict, the Trump tariffs, and the other issues on American industry. Joining us, the CEO and chair of General Motors, Mary Barra. Thanks so much for being here.
It's great to see you.
I want to talk about a lot of things with you, but first about the impact of the war in Iran. Obviously, we've seen the impact of tariffs and how that's affected the industry. Where you stand, King Charles is better than his Brit Hume. And two, I know my wife's birthday was just transcribed wrong. Yeah, thanks. Good evening. Welcome to Washington. I'm Brett Baer. Conspiracy theories about Saturday's attempted assassination of President Trump and concerns over foreign attempts to flood Americans with disinformation. We'll have that report. President Trump, meantime, vowing to maintain the U.S. blockade of Iranian ports until a nuclear deal is done. And we talked with General Motors Chair and CEO Mary Barra about the Iran conflict, the Trump tariffs, and her business. But first, breaking tonight, we have major developments in the battle to redraw congressional maps before this fall's midterm elections. The U.S. Supreme Court today struck down a Louisiana map that added a second black majority district, and Florida lawmakers have just approved a redistricting proposal to maximize the Republican advantage in that state. We have Fox Team coverage. Shannon Bream has details on how the Supreme Court decision could affect the balance of power in the House, but we begin with correspondent Dana Marie McNichol in Tallahassee, Florida. Good evening, Dana Marie.
Good evening, Brett. That new map drafted by Florida Governor Ron DeSantis could add up to 4 Republican-leaning seats in the U.S. House before the midterms. Now, that redrawn map impacts districts in South Florida, Tampa, and Orlando. Republicans currently hold 20 of Florida's 28 congressional seats. This likely leaves Democrats with just 4. Now, today, both Republicans and Democrats were given the opportunity to debate the map, the state House approving 83 to 28, the Senate 21 to 17. Democrats claim the map and the process lacked transparency, calling it politically motivated and a violation of state law. They warn this fight is headed straight to the courts with a lawsuit already drafted.
You are destroying democracy with this vote. The people of Florida deserve better. Not one of our constituents asked for this, not one. Shame on this House today.
DeSantis remains confident in the constitutionality of his map, giving 2 reasons for redistricting. First, he says Florida has added more Republican voters since the 2020 census, making it necessary to redraw lines in areas with a population change. And second, he claims the current map was drafted with racial data. DeSantis is also using today's Supreme Court decision on the Voting Rights Act as legal backing, arguing it will impact part of Florida's own constitution.
I vetoed the legislature's maps in 2022. We ended up doing a compromise map, got rid of a racially gerrymandered district in North Florida, but we still had one in Southern Florida, which I don't think is constitutional. This map removes that racial gerrymander.
And DeSantis does expect to sign the map. It may face an uphill legal battle in the Florida Supreme Court. We reached out to his team for reaction via no comment tonight. Brett?
Dana Marie, thank you. Democrats are decrying the Supreme Court ruling today against a black majority district in Louisiana that rolls back a key provision of the Voting Rights Act. We get details tonight from Fox News chief legal correspondent, anchor of Fox News Sunday, Shannon Bream.
Certainly, the precedent of this decision will impact other states.
As redistricting fights across the country aim to reshape the midterm playing field, the Supreme Court has issued a decision that could send states scrambling to redraw maps in a move seen favorable to Republicans, and one that has the potential to impact somewhere in the neighborhood of roughly 20 current congressional districts.
Would you consider it a win for who?
Win for Republicans. I love it. The 6-3 opinion finds Louisiana erred in drawing a second predominantly black district, which it had done in response to earlier litigation challenging its map at the time. Justice Alito writing for the majority, quote, "No compelling interest justified the state's use of race in creating SB 8. That map is an unconstitutional gerrymander, and its use would violate the plaintiff's constitutional rights." Justice Thomas authored a concurring opinion joined by Justice Gorsuch, going beyond the majority's ruling. Quote, "I would would go further and hold that Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act does not regulate districting at all. The dissenters, Justices Kagan, Sotomayor, and Jackson, warn they fear Section 2 is essentially, quote, a dead letter following today's decision. The consequences are likely to be far-reaching and grave. If other states follow Louisiana's lead, the minority citizens residing there will no longer have an equal opportunity to elect candidates of their choice.
I think what the Supreme Court is saying is it doesn't matter what communities are actively harmed, so long as you can't prove intent.
It's unclear whether some legislatures will now be able, if they want, to redraw their maps in time to affect the midterms, since primary voting has already started in many states. Also today, the court issued a unanimous decision in favor of a group of pregnancy centers in New Jersey. They have been fighting a subpoena from the state attorney general seeking the names, phone numbers, addresses, and even places of employment from...
Don't at all.
I have to.
No.
Hello? Hey.
Today, the court issued a unanimous decision in favor of a group of pregnancy centers in New Jersey. They have been fighting a subpoena from the state attorney general seeking the names, phone numbers, addresses, and even places of employment from some of their donors. The justices found those demands created a burden on the right to associate under the First Amendment. Brett?
All right, Shannon, thank you. President Trump says Iran is in what he calls a state of collapse amid intense economic pressure from the U.S. He says the regime is losing about $170 million a day because of the blockade. A blockade, the president says, will remain in place until Iran agrees to a nuclear deal. Correspondent Mark Meredith reports tonight live from the North Lawn of the White House. Good evening, Mark.
Brett, good to see you. Tonight, President Trump says Iran's regime can't hold on much longer. And while peace talks between the U.S. and Iran have been in this on and off again phase now for weeks, the president did pick up the phone today to speak to another major world leader, Russian President Vladimir Putin.
We had a very good conversation.
Tonight, President Trump says in a call with Vladimir Putin, he voiced support for Russia's plan for a brief ceasefire with Ukraine in May, as Russia marks the 81st anniversary of victory over Nazi Germany.
I asked him about, even if it's a little ceasefire, there's so many people being killed, it's so ridiculous.
Trump, surrounded by astronauts from the Artemis II mission,
We're very proud of these people, they have unbelievable courage.
said he remains focused on problems back on Earth. The president claiming Iran's economy is crumbling amid a U.S. blockade of Iran's ports.
Well, the blockade is genius, okay? The blockade has been 100% foolproof. It shows how good our Navy is, I can tell you that. Nobody's going to play games.
Since mid-April, the U.S. has blocked dozens of Iranian ships from transiting the Strait of Hormuz, essentially trapping Iran's oil exports. Here at home, the war's impact most notable at the gas pump. AAA says the national average for a gallon of gas now sits at $4.23 a gallon, up more than $1 from a year ago. Fox has learned the president met privately with oil executives Tuesday, a day before outgoing Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell announced interest rates will remain unchanged.
Inflation has moved up and is elevated, in part reflecting the recent increase in global energy prices.
Powell, who was appointed Fed chair during Trump's first term, is not leaving the central bank altogether. He says he'll remain a Fed governor through the end of his term in January 2028. Powell says it's the president's repeated political attacks and threats of White House interference in Fed decision-making which changed his plans.
I'm literally staying because of the actions that have been taken. I had long planned to be retiring.
Moments ago, President Trump weighed in on Powell's decision to stick around the Fed a bit longer. The president's saying it's because he can't get a job anywhere else and that nobody wants him. The Senate Banking Committee today also moved forward the nomination of Powell's replacement, Kevin Warsh. The full Senate's now going to get a chance to vote on his nomination. That vote expected by mid-May, right before Powell's chairmanship wraps up. Brett?
Mark Meredith, live on the North Lawn. Mark, thank you. Wall Street stocks mixed today. The Dow lost 280. The S&P 500 was off 3. The Nasdaq gained 9. War Secretary Pete Hegseth came out firing today as he testified on Capitol Hill about the Iran conflict and the Pentagon budget. Secretary Hegseth told lawmakers they constitute America's biggest adversary right now, not the leaders of Russia, China, or Iran. Meanwhile, a Pentagon official says the fighting has cost the U.S. $25 billion so far. Chief National Security Correspondent Jennifer Griffin has details tonight.
The biggest adversary we face at this point are the reckless, feckless, and defeatist words of congressional Democrats and some Republicans.
This was the first time Secretary Hegseth and General Kane answered questions publicly under oath since the war against Iran began 60 days ago. They are defending the Pentagon's $1.5 trillion budget request, a $500 billion increase from last year.
This represents a historic down payment on future security.
Lawmakers question the Iran war's cost.
I would simply ask you what the cost is of an unending
The Pentagon